In this video, you'll learn how to work with documents, worksheets, and presentations that are stored in SharePoint 2016 document libraries, including how to control whether you use the online or desktop versions of the applications for your editing, how to manage multiple users editing at the same time, known as co-authoring, how to use or even enforce a check-in-checkout system to prohibit co-authoring, how to work with versions of documents, and how to restore a previous version. So here I am back in our SharePoint Teams site, and as you learned in the last video, you can choose to interact with the document library as it's presented either here as a web part on a page or in its list presentation, like so. And in the list presentation, you can either look at it in the new experience or in the classic experience. I'm going to switch to Classic SharePoint. And the first thing I want to show you is how to choose which version of the application you're going to use for editing. If you click on the name of a file, a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, or an Excel workbook, specifically I'm speaking of those three, you will be taken to the online version of that app. The online versions are lightweight versions of the desktop apps that you can use with nothing more than a web browser. Very convenient if you're not on your own computer, if you're on a computer that doesn't have Microsoft Office desktop software installed on it. You can do 70 or 80% of what you could do in the desktop version here in the online version. And if you ever run out of power and need to switch to the desktop version, assuming you have that installed on the current computer, clicking this Edit In button will take you to editing the same document in the desktop application. Obviously, you can make changes to your documents in the online version of the app, as I'll demonstrate here. And that it saves automatically every few seconds. When you're done, simply click the back button in your browser, and you're back to the document library. Refresh the page, and you'll notice that the changes were made just a few seconds ago to that document. If you need to do more robust editing, then use the desktop app instead of the online app. To do so, don't click the name, rather click the ellipsis next to the document or file that you want to open. And then either click Open here, which will launch the desktop application, or click the second ellipsis, where you then have it very clearly spelled out whether you want to open the file into the desktop application or the online application. I'll open it up into the desktop version. And the document, being a Word document, opens up into the desktop version of Microsoft Word. One of the greatest features of these latest versions of Microsoft Word is co-authoring. That is, the ability for multiple users to edit the same Microsoft Word document at the same time. This only works if the document is hosted online in the cloud, that is, on a SharePoint site, in a document library on a SharePoint site, or in a OneDrive storage location. But if that's the case, you can have multiple people pile into the same document and make their changes simultaneously without having to share or play round robin, tag, you're it, you can edit now that I'm done. They can all make their changes at the same time. Keep in mind that the changes that are being made are not being tracked as to who made them and when. If you need that, then of course, use Microsoft Word's Track Changes command. Turning Track Changes on will make it so that changes made by anyone at any time will be treated more as suggestions, and the final editor will have the opportunity to go through at the end and accept or reject all of those suggestions. Now I'm going to turn Track Changes off just so as not to complicate the issue of co-authoring. And I'm going to try, to the best of my ability, to actually demonstrate what it looks like when multiple people all jump into the same Word document at the same time and make changes. I'm recording this video on a Mac, but I'm running Windows virtually. As you'll see here, I'm going to resize this Windows window, and you'll see that there's a Mac running actually behind it. The user that I'm logged in as on the PC is me, Tim, as you can see here. But I've also got in Google Chrome on my Mac running in the background here, another user named Trainer1 who's logged into the same SharePoint team site. And I'm now going to jump into that same going to jump into that same Word document on the Mac side from a different user, by different user. Click the ellipsis, click Open, and that's going to launch Word on the Mac. Again, the user on the left is named Trainer1. The user on the right is me, Tim. And there, so I've got the document open by two different users at the same time. Now, if I'm the Mac user and I click into this paragraph here, you can see that a red flag is positioned over for the other user, telling that user that there's another user editing right at that location. And back over here, I'll just change it to an S and a period. And you can see that the changes are being reflected live as they happen for the other user. If the other user tries to make a change to that same paragraph, they're going to be disappointed and prevented from making such a change. For example, if this user, the PC user, tries to delete that N, a message appears down here saying you can't make this change because the selection is locked. Okay, so Microsoft Word, when there are multiple users editing the same document, enforces what's called paragraph locking. Oh, by the way, it also lets you know who made the change. Paragraph locking keeps a user from making changes to a paragraph that another user is making simultaneously. Likewise, if I come in here as the PC user and start making a change to this paragraph, you can see it happening right before the very eyes of the Mac user over there on the left. Pretty amazing. Changes are being saved automatically every few seconds, thanks to autosave here, which is turned on automatically when a file is stored in the cloud, that is on SharePoint or in OneDrive. All right, I'll try to make some more changes here on the Mac side. Perhaps select this image and delete it. And you can see that sometimes the updates don't take place immediately. There's a little bit of latency, a little bit of sluggishness occasionally. There it goes. Now, just for fun, I'm going to add a third user into the mix on an iPad. This user is student 10, and they're coming in right about now, and we can see a message over here that informs me that student 10 Accelerate just jumped onto the document and is currently editing. And so if that student or if that user taps into the document on their iPad somewhere, you can see the orange flag right here indicates where they are for both the other users. So we've got 3 people all in the party at this point, and we're making changes on the iPad, and they're being reflected in for both the other users. Pretty amazing. And once again, if once a paragraph has been started to be edited by one user, then it can't be edited by others, except for after a little while. Enough time has passed where the changes have been saved and synced up. You see, I was just able to delete that word thematic, even though the paragraph had indicated that it was locked. There must have been just enough time for it to save and sync the changes. This bar next to it says, hey, there's a user making changes. You can't make the changes to this paragraph. Let me try to make some more changes here. And again, a message appears. Can't make the change because the selection is locked. As soon as the other user gets out of that other paragraph or enough time has elapsed, then we can go back and make the desired changes. I'll try to delete that text, or replace that text with There we go, and now it's able to make it successfully. Again, all the changes are saved automatically every few seconds, but they are not tracked. We don't know who made what changes after the fact. Obviously, you can point to a flag and see what changes were made. There we can see that student 10. But if you need the changes to be tracked so that you know who made them and can undo them, then you need to turn on track changes before you allow anybody in to start editing this document once it's housed on the SharePoint library. So one by one, I'll go ahead and exit out of this document, saving the changes as I go. Actually, it's going to have saved them for me. And there's the Mac user. I'll exit out of it on the iPad, which you can't see, but I just exited out on the iPad. And finally, there was a brief message that showed up there saying that I was the only user remaining. Finally, I'll go ahead and get this window back to full screen size again and exit out and close it up. Co-authoring also works in Excel, PowerPoint, Visio, and OneNote. Here I am in an Excel workbook, Classical Concerts, by two users, one on a Windows machine and another on a Mac. You'll notice that as the PC user moves from cell to cell, the colored border indicates the PC user's location. And likewise, switching over to the Mac, if the Mac user moves to a different cell, the PC user sees the colored border indicating where that user is working. Changes made will be reflected almost immediately. As I change this number 4500 to 5500, for example, the color here indicates that that other user is editing that cell, and I'll hit the Enter key to commit the change, and there, it updates. So it's not instantaneous, but under perfect conditions, it's pretty close. This is all assuming that autosave is on, and it is on by default. You can see that here, and that it saves after every change that you make. Even changes that you make to formatting. For example, I'll come over and have the Mac user make this change, selecting some cells, and let's use the comma formatting style there. And you can see there it updates, and I'll take away the decimal digits, and that change happens almost instantaneously as well. Okay. I've got a third user involved here on an iPad. You can't see that screen, but let's say that the iPad user is going to make a change to these percentage numbers right here, making them look like a percent. You can see the indicator here saying student 10 is now editing. And here we go, making that change. There, and it updates for both the PC user and the Mac user, made by an iPad by a third user. One question you might have is, well, what if two users edit the same cell at exactly the same time? Who wins? Well, let's find out. I'll make a change here by the PC user. I'll change that profit number to 25,000. But I won't commit it just yet. I'm going to come over on the iPad. I know you can't see it, but I'll change it to 30,000 on the iPad. And I'll try to hit the Enter key to commit those changes at exactly the same time. 1, 2, 3, go. So 25,000 on the PC, 30,000 on the iPad, and let's see what the Mac user reports. That still 25,000. iPad still says 30,000. And there it changed to 30,000. So apparently the iPad was the last one in, because there really aren't, when you're talking about milliseconds, any two events that take place exactly at the same time. And so you will obviously have maybe a little bit of stepping on each other's toes, but that's why you have to use good security to keep people out of editing your workbooks that you don't trust to edit, and only allow people in who you really trust to make good changes. Fortunately, there are versions that are saved in SharePoint that you can roll back to if there are any changes made that you didn't care for. And we'll talk about how to do that later on in this video. Another question you might have is, what about linked formulas? Well, let's say I jump over here as the PC user, and I'm going to change this 20, which is just a static entry at this point into a formula that refers to a cell on another sheet. Equals sheet 2. I'll refer to this cell A5 here. So there's the formula, equals sheet 2, exclamation point A5, and hit enter. And it says 50, and it goes to 50 for the other users as well. So formulas that link to other sheets are perfectly fine. What about formulas that link to other workbooks? Those are fine too, as long as those workbooks are also housed in the SharePoint library. To demonstrate that, I'll create a new file and save it to the SharePoint library. Notice the convenience by which we can save to our SharePoint sites. That's the site that I want. And I'll just call it data. And put it in that documents library, which is represented by a folder. There's the other workbook that we've been working on. I'll save this one right alongside it. I could also save it into a subfolder if I wanted to, maybe into that Composer BIOS folder. But I'll just put it alongside, that's fine. And then let's say I put a number over here in cell D5. Okay, so now I've got another workbook created, stored in the SharePoint library, and I'm going to switch back over into the first Excel workbook and create a reference to that cell. I'll put it right here, type an equal sign, switch over into the other workbook, just like you would if you were working locally, select that cell, and it writes the formula, giving the workbook name, then the sheet name, and finally the cell name. Pressing the Enter key. There we go. And as I move into another cell so we can see a little bit better, on the Mac version, it should update to 100 pretty soon. Likewise on the iPad. But it's a little bit different. Notice we get a message on both the Mac and the iPad saying that there's a new version available. Reopen to get the latest version. So I'll click Reopen. And we get a message about links to external sources. I trust the external sources because they happen to be me. And I'll say Update. I'll do the same on the iPad over here, saying Refresh. And you see, sure enough, the result of that formula has changed. And you can see the nature of the formula includes the entire path to the SharePoint site there, and then the HTTPS all the way up through training is the path to the SharePoint site, then the name of the shared documents library, and finally the name of the file, the name of the worksheet within that file, and the name of the cell on that worksheet. Over here in the source workbook, where the formula was created, the path isn't quite so explicit, but it still works. On the iPad screen, when I select the cell that has that newly written formula in it, the formula bar simply says, this cell has an external reference that can't be shown or edited. Editing this cell will remove the external reference. In other words, the web versions or the mobile versions of the apps in which you edit don't have the ability to let you see or edit formulas that include references to cells in other workbooks or in other files. But you can see that the native desktop Excel application does. So that's co-authoring in Excel. Pretty amazing features. Let's take a look at it in PowerPoint just real briefly. Here's that PowerPoint presentation, Composers, stored in the same SharePoint document library. And I've got it open up as user Tim on the PC. I'll come over here as student 6 on the Mac and open up that same Composers PowerPoint presentation. Now, I'm using the new experience here, not the classic experience, so the look and feel is a little bit different. I'm not going to click on the name. That would open it up into PowerPoint Online, and I want the full features of PowerPoint, let's say in this case, although you really ought to check out the online versions of the applications. They're quite nice for being browser-based. I'll click on the ellipsis and choose Open, and choose Open in PowerPoint, the desktop version. Yes, I do want to do that. We're notified that we're co-authoring with one or more other users, and we're reminded that autosave is on. Got it? And just so we can see both versions at the same time, I'll shrink this down a good bit. Switching back over to the PC side. And let's say we start making some changes. I'm going to come in here and superscript the TH there so it looks more professional, much nicer. Do the same thing with that TH. Add the superscripting. And you can see that the changes are being made over here for the other users almost in real time. Again, thanks to autosave being on, it synchronizes on save. Now I'll have the other user make a change to this second slide, and we can watch that change happen here. I'm on the Mac version now. Make that change from 1740 to 1750, and you can see that the change has been made. The pencil icon here lets you know that a certain user is typing. Again, what if two users make changes to the same slide near about the same time? Well, let's find out. So the user on the left just made a change to the text of the slide. Let's have the user on the right swap out this picture of handle for a better one. We'll go look online for some Creative Commons image of George Frederick Handel. And there's a nice one. Insert that. Very nice. And the change took a few seconds, but there it is. If you'd like to edit a document without the possibility of other users jumping in and making edits at the same time, you can simply check out that document or presentation or Excel workbook, and that will keep other users from being able to engage in co-authoring with you. To check out a file, point to the ellipsis next to it, click the second ellipsis, point to Advanced, and choose Checkout. A message will appear here indicating the file is being checked out to you, and its icon will change. A small green arrow will be attached to the icon. If you point to the icon, or if other users point to the icon in that same document library, you and they'll be notified who has it checked out. Now, checking it out does not open it, but you can open it now, knowing that you'll be the only one to be able to edit it. I'm going to click the name to open the document into Word Online because I haven't demonstrated the online apps much in these videos. Again, the online apps are lightweight versions of their desktop counterparts. You can do a good portion of what you could do in the desktop version here in the online app. And if you find that you need more power, you can click the Edit In button to launch the document into the desktop version of the application, assuming it's installed on the computer you're working on. I'll make some changes here. And notice auto-saving is in effect as well. When done, simply click the back button, and we'll go back to the document library. Then I'll want to be sure to check the document back in. Click the ellipsis. Click the second ellipsis, point to Advanced, and you'll notice two commands dealing with Checkout and Check-in. One is Discard Checkout. That would discard all of the changes that you had made in that last session and make it as though you had never checked out the document in the first place. The Check-in command, however, will commit your changes and check the document back in so that other users can get to work on it in the future. As I click Check-in, I'll be given the opportunity to add comments to the version that's being created. And I can put comments here. Checking in, and you'll notice the icon has changed back to its normal state. If you like the idea of prohibiting co-authoring for all the files in a document library, you can simply change the settings for that library to require that files be checked out. Now, in order to change this setting, you have to be at least a contributing member to the site or to the document library. You can't just have read-only permissions. But if you have the necessary permissions, here's how we change that setting. Get into the library by clicking either the name here on the web part on a page, or clicking the link to the library in the Quick Launch bar. Once you're in the library, if you're in the New Experience, you go to the gear menu in the top right and choose Library Settings. On the other hand, if you're in the Classic experience, which I'll switch to now, then you go to the Library tab on the ribbon and click Library Settings here. Among the library settings, find the one called Versioning Settings and click it. In this page, you can require a content approval workflow for the files in this library. You can specify what kind of versioning control you would like applied to the documents in this library. Create major version is the default behavior. I'll go ahead and turn on Create Major and Minor or Draft versions. We'll look at that in more detail in a moment. You might want to then specify a limit of the number of versions to be kept to keep the hard drive requirements down, both for the number of major versions and the number of draft versions per major version. I'll set that to 20. Now, draft versions or minor versions, in my opinion, should only be seen by people who have editing capabilities over the documents in that library, not just anybody who can look at them. And so I'm going to set it appropriately. That way we keep the minor versions to just the co-authors, just the contributing members. And when we publish the next major version, that version can be read by the general public. Finally, the question we came here to answer, do we want to require that documents be checked out before they can be edited? Setting that to yes requires the checkout. I'll say OK and go back to the document library. Now, when I go to edit a document or a workbook or a PowerPoint presentation, clicking the ellipsis and clicking Open, it reminds me that checkout is required, and I need to hit the checkout button. There we go. Now I have the document available and open for my exclusive editing privileges. I'll make some changes. And then when I close, it asks if I want to save the changes because autosave is not active when you've got the document checked out. And then it asks also if I want to check the document back in. And yes, I do. Otherwise, other users would not be able to check it out in the future and make edits to it. Kind of like holding on to a library book long after it's overdue. And then also, because I turned on minor or draft versions, it asks what kind of version this check-in should generate. A minor version, 18.1 in this case, or the next major version, 19.0. I'll make it a minor version, and I'll just say Tim's latest changes, and click OK. Okay, the document's closed, and I want to double check that it really got checked in. I'll click the ellipsis, point to Advanced, and I can tell by looking at it that it's not checked out anymore. If it were, this would say check in. The fact that it says check out means that it's not currently checked out. That is, it's ready to go for somebody else to edit. Here, by the way, is the command that you'd use to promote a minor version, a draft version, to be the next major version. Now, if you do want to look at the version history of a document, simply click on that second ellipsis and choose Version History. And the version history appears in a scrollable list. Date and time of submission, and the contributing editor who modified it. If you wanted to look at a version, you could click on its date and time and it would open up. But if you want to be able to restore that version to the current version, have it leapfrog up to the top of the list, in other words, if document checkout is required, you're going to need to check out the document first. Okay? Checkout's not available here, so I'll close the version history panel. I'll check it out like I taught you to a moment ago. There, now I've got it checked out for my exclusive use. And we'll click the ellipsis and the ellipsis again. So now if I find a version that should become the new version, I can do it. I'll click the version 15. Let's say I think that was a really good version. Click on it just to make sure. It opens up. And a message appears saying, to make this previous version become the latest, click Restore. As I look through it, if I really like it and think, oh yeah, that's the good version, that's the one we should have gone with, and all the later versions are bad, so I'll click Restore. This was version 15, and now it's going to move to, I think it's going to be version 19, if my memory serves, or it could be 18.1. Let's see. I'll close it up. And we look at the version history. Oh, 18.2. There we go. So that created an 18.2. And if I wanted to promote that 18.2 to be the next major version, well, I showed you that a moment ago. That was under the ellipsis here. First, I'll check it back in. And we could make it a major version here. Or, if it weren't checked out, we would click the 3 dots, click the next 3 dots, choose Advanced, and choose Publish a Major Version. Looking again at the version history, we'll now see that there is a version 19. 3 dots, version history, and there we go. What used to be version 18.2 is now 19.0. So that's how you work with versions, restoring an older version to be the current version, and how to publish a major version from a minor draft.